Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings.
Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations, a podcast by Practical E-Commerce.
What is going on, Internet? Eric Van Holt's back again with another E-Commerce Conversations. I hope all is going well on the other side of the Internet. On the other side of the table from me, Kevin. What's up, man?
Hey, Eric. How's it going?
I'm doing all right, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day.
Yeah. I'm excited to have you on the show. You are one of the icons of e-commerce. I want to say it. I want to grant you that crown. Why don't you tell our listeners what the heck you do, or more, or what you don't do, I guess.
What I don't do. So I got into e-commerce in 2014 or 2015, pretty much at the beginning of 2015, after being an operator for small venture capital groups, high net worth angels in the Washington, D.C. area. And what I saw was this outstanding opportunity to be able to test ideas without investing a ton of capital. So my first business, I started off by buying or licensing intellectual property. So I would go out, I'd find a utility patent that somebody would have in my network. Often it would be a crazy uncle or somebody's boyfriend or father or whatever would have these patents. And to be honest, they'd come to me. I'd then run some really rapid fire MVP type tests and see if I had a product that could convert given a thesis about the traffic and about the unique selling proposition. And then if the data showed that it would convert, I'd go ahead and buy the patent or license the patent, or sometimes there'd be some sort of a partnership structure. One of the first patents that I licensed was for this crazy water-powered turbine brush that was used for cleaning cars, motorcycles, small children, whatever you wanted to clean. And when we tested it, it had this great add-to-cart rate. So we went ahead and we licensed it. And that grew pretty rapidly, both domestically and internationally. We ended up appearing on Shark Tank, which is part of how you and I know each other. And then we sold into Costco, Walmart, Canadian Tire, a whole bunch of other places. That created a whole bunch of other adventures in e-commerce. And I exited that business in 2020 and was picked up by a private equity group, a small private equity fund, who had bought a brand called balls.co.
There you go, and balls.co. Well, I still want to talk about this idea of finding patents and building a business off of this. So I guess there are a bunch of quote-unquote inventors who just get ideas and they go through the hassle of creating a patent on their idea.
Sure.
You said they come to you. How do you get them to come to you?
Just through networking. I was really quite surprised. This wasn't a super well-formed thesis. It was, how can I come up with ideas that I can test that had some sort of defensibility to them? Obviously, patents provide a ton of defensibility, but I wasn't particularly interested in going out and inventing something and having my own patent. But once I put the idea out to my wider network, they just started appearing. Deal flow was absolutely never a problem. Good deal flow was always a problem.
So how do you, quote unquote, put it out to your network?
Socializing it.
Just saying, I'm looking for interesting products with patents?
Well, exactly. People would ask me what I did, and I would simply say, well, I buy intellectual property and I build online brands. And this was sort of the beginning of the social media upcurve. So that was really interesting to people. And inevitably, in the circles in which I was in, somebody in their network would have a patent. And even to this day, I just had a inbound lead just yesterday about a crazy reinvention of the plunger that I could check out. I probably won't.
What are these circles, and how do people get into these circles?
Oh, so I'm not the world's best networker. I don't go to a ton of different conferences and such. Really, they're professional circles, friends, neighbors, just being open to this sort of conversation, I think. I wish I could say that it was like a regimented process of I'm going to go to the inventor's circle and I'm going to hang a shingle and tell people that this is what I do. But as you said, there are plenty of ideas out there and plenty of inventors, but there aren't a whole lot of people who know how to execute on those ideas. So once I gained a reputation for being somebody who could execute on a patent and who was willing to acquire licenses that were pretty favorable to the inventors, I had no shortage of opportunities.
What do those deals look like between either acquiring a patent, how do you value the patent's worth, or how do you value the license?
So it's a good question, and they're all one-off and highly dependent on the inventor's own professional experience and the type of industry where they've operated. Usually we would identify some sort of a fair minimum standard for the license. It would be a few percentage of revenue, or it could be a few percentage of gross profit, particularly if the inventor had some sort of a say or a hand into manufacturing. I have done deals where the inventor was actually essentially a supplier of the product because they had captive manufacturing. But usually I made sure that the agreements were favorable enough to the inventor that if it wasn't working out for them, they could get out in some way, shape, or form.
So what would a typical percentage look like? Are we talking like 2% of revenue or 10% of profit, or?
It depends. 3.5% to 5% is what I was generally looking for at the time. Now, this was several years ago. I haven't actually
profit or of revenue?
Of revenue.
Oh, wow.
Which is significant up to a certain point. And if I was hitting scale revenue, then it would decline from there.
Okay.
And in negotiations, I would try to have some sort of a buyout opportunity that was preset in the contract.
That you could buy out or they would buy out?
Oh, we would buy out. That
Okay.
If we had basically a first right of refusal if they were interested in selling and it had hit a certain revenue threshold. To be fair, I never executed on one of those,
Okay.
but we were always shooting for the moon. So if
Yeah.
the opportunity presented itself, we would have done so.
So when you exited from that business in 2020, that inventor, I guess, is still connected with the new owners now? Or like, do you have to have that inventor kind of like sign off on that transition?
You would ordinarily. In that particular case, the patent had expired during our course of operation. So we went through a renegotiation process with the inventor. Still, I feel we treated them quite fairly. But at that point, the business was the asset as opposed to the patent being the asset.
Okay, cool. So you moved on to balls, and there's a nice little video of you at ECF. I don't know if you intended this or not, but you talked about how you had balls had really a lot of in-your-face marketing. So you guys got a lot of balls in your face, huh?
Well, yeah, awesome. So I am, we're on audio here, but I'm pretty much a straight man. So the idea that I run a company called Balls Co. is pretty hilarious to everyone I know.
Yeah.
It is, however, a true gift to be a marketer who's handed a brand that really allows you to lean into edgy concepts that most brands have to be very cagey about what they're actually selling and what they're actually doing and what the value proposition is. But if you're going to run a brand called Balls, you just have to own it. You have to own that this is what you're going to do, and you have to lean into it. You can't be you can't be subtle, I think. And there are a lot of other brands in this space. So this is the manscaping space, to be clear.
Right.
That we're doing full body trimmers focused on intimate pelvic areas. And if you're Manscaped, which is a lovely brand, and they're doing a fantastic job, they've created an air of luxury around the brand. And it just never felt quite right with a brand called Balls. So instead, the tactic was to go for more of a lad or a bro.
Low
a
bro.
lad because it's a UK brand and is one of the more dominant UK brands in this particular space.
Yeah. As a fellow person in the men's grooming space, I know how challenging that business can be. And you decided to make it more challenging by doing business overseas and living in America.
Yes, I did. And when The investors purchased the company. It was running 8 Shopify stores in 4 languages and 4 currencies. And there are a lot of technical reasons why that needed to be the case as far as the tech stack was concerned. And the instinct is that you have to simplify the brand to clarify what you're actually offering. But we ended up in a bit of a trap with existing subscribers that were in all of these countries that put us in a place where we really had to continue to run all of those stores. Now, technology is improving. Some of your listeners will probably respond with, oh, why didn't you do X, Y, and Z? Believe me, we looked into X, Y, and Z, and it wasn't going to be cost effective for us to do that. Plus, as an American, I have an understanding of Brexit, but I didn't have the intimate understanding of the ramifications of Brexit until I ran a UK company. And soon after the deal closed, some of the customs enforcement aspects of Brexit kicked in, and we ended up with something like 3,500 packages stuck in customs. All of a sudden, we had to redo our entire supply chain. It was truly special.
You know, we pulled out of Europe a few years ago, and I remember, you know, maybe this is just my hubris of a young entrepreneur thinking I can tackle everything, but this just kind of feeling of going into Europe is going to be like doing business in America. And the reality I found, and maybe you can speak a little bit to this as well, is like every country is different. Like as much as like here in America, it's like, oh yeah, I'll sell in California, I'll sell in Texas. It's pretty much the same thing. In Europe, it's like the British and the Germans and the French, they all buy different ways. And like the Germans, they like to pay cash or whatever, like when the product receives. So there's like different payment things. And it's just like, it's crazy. And it's like, they're all tiny markets. It's like Denmark's got 4 million people or something, 5 million people. And then they wanted it done differently. And they got to have like their Scandinavian languages. And, you know, it's just so difficult, I think. And then you've got the VAT and like, you got to file this stuff. And
so I think it's so complicated that I recently put up a Clarity FM micro consulting gig that is essentially pay me a few $100s and let me talk you out of European expansion. Because if you think it's a great idea and it's going to change the nature of your business, you're in for a serious shock. In this case, your business was already European, so the challenge was actually expanding to the US. But you're spot on as far as the language needs, the cultural differences, the approach to market, the processors, the taxes. It's just absolutely never ending. And then layering on complexity of multiple international organizations as well. So we had a US organization and a British organization. Actually, we had 2 British companies. Just super, super complicated, which distracts the team from the core marketing of the business, which is at the end of the day is what we needed to be spending 90% of our time doing. And although I did feel like we'd inherited the situation and we had to make the best out of it, it certainly had moments where I was wishing that we only had a couple of markets to deal with.
yeah, you know, like if you had, you know, dictatorial powers, did it ever cross your mind to be like, all right, well, let's just cut off, you know, 7 of these countries, focus on the UK. Like this is our top dog. It's doing like, was one country doing like 80% of the business or was it pretty well?
So UK was the dominant market, followed by Germany, followed by the rest of Europe, then France, and so on and so forth. And it is interesting as an American to not list the US in those countries. I've never been so European oriented before. Our mandate was to find breakthrough marketing messages. And one of the ways that we could do that was by testing different concepts in different languages and different cultures to see if we could find soft spots in the market. With a giant gorilla like Manscaped out there starting to gobble up share, we went horizontal as opposed to vertical in some of these markets. Was that a great decision? I don't know. Time will tell. It certainly was challenging.
Yeah. So you feel like the decisions you made at the time were probably the best strategies that you're facing. Is Manscaped got a pretty strong presence in?
Yeah, it's a very strong brand. You know, there's a lot of scuttlebutt about their overall financial structure and them trying to SPAC and putting together a $1 billion deal and such. And it's been pointed out in a lot of media that maybe the business wasn't strong enough to support all of that, but they are a wicked, smart group of aggressive marketers, and I have nothing but respect for what they've accomplished. And they are certainly taking share pretty much everywhere they go out there. balls also had a bit of a detriment in that something that seems a little bit obvious as we're talking, but was less obvious at the time, was the impact of a trademark like balls. Mm-hmm. And what that would mean as far as direct response marketing or performance marketing on social channels. The term balls is it's pretty innocuous given what you see on social marketing, but it was a bit of a whack-a-mole that we ran into with the various platforms, and we had a difficult time.
They would cut down ads and stuff like that just for using the word balls.
Just for using the word balls or having the domain balls. So we had a very difficult time for a lot of reasons, marketing on Facebook in particular, which meant that we had to get very creative of how we were going to get our message out there and market. So we leaned heavily into a content marketing strategy instead of a direct response strategy. Invested heavily into our TikTok channel, which did exceptionally well. Growing 150 million views in just a few months, 300,000 followers, and continues to rise.
That's paid or?
No, that was organic.
All organic. Huh?
That was all organic. And we tested a bunch of concepts and eventually hit on something that thematically worked with the brand and that was almost an entertainment medium. So what we did is we found really awesome stand-up comedians and essentially dispatched them all over the world to interview people about their intimate grooming habits.
Oh, okay. So it was like man on the street.
Yeah, man on the street. Exactly. That's what we called it. It was our man on the street. And we had one comedian in particular who was just fantastic. And he really got the concept and he could just get the best out of people. And it becomes a bit of a numbers game that you put a really smart comedian on the street with subject matter like, do you shave your balls? And lo and behold, awesome content results and that people want to watch. Now, that's content that people want to watch. It doesn't necessarily translate into direct sales. And I think that a lot of the conversations that brands are having about short form video in particular, this needs to be focused on a little bit more, that you have to decide what your goal is. If you're going out there in short form media and you're trying to actually convert people, the message necessarily has to be really commercial. If the message is really commercial, then you're unlikely to hold customers' interest such that you can build a brand around it. On the flip side, if you go too far to the entertainment side of the spectrum, you're entertaining people, but there's no real need for them to go buy the product. You're just like it's a funny guy in the street who's talking about balls. And most of our followers probably fell into that category. The trick is to recognize that when you have an opportunity like this to grow organically, it's usually worth doing anyway because the cost of brand building through more traditional channels is just so prohibitive. We did not skimp on our tours, but even so, our CPMs were probably in the 20-cent range as far as producing this content. I'll do that all day long if I could in more traditional media channels, but I wouldn't be able to afford that. So here I've established a brand at the very tippy top of the funnel, like not top of the funnel, like brand foam on top of the funnel. And that lubricates the rest of the funnel and gives me an opportunity to convert customers later. But without having some of the ability to advertise because of the brand, it was a continual challenge to try and figure out how we were going to turn that brand identity into customers long term without investing even more heavily in traditional brand building. And that's a different investment model. And the investors behind the company will have to make that decision eventually.
Yeah. I want to talk about this comedian. How did you find them and how did you find the format that works? Because hitting that kind of views in such a short period of time. And I guess the final question is like, it's short form, but how short were the videos? Was it like one interviewee or would you do like 3 interviewees per video?
We would do multi-day shoots. Yeah, we did Berlin, London.
Was the comedian a British person?
He was a British Serbian. So
okay.
Just how did we find him? Networking again.
Okay.
Just
going to comedy clubs? Or
yeah, put the word out there. We're looking for somebody funny who's willing to talk about balls all the time. And I have to laugh because that's most certainly not me. And when I was approached for this, I warned the investors. I'm like, look, guys, I'm the straight man. I'm not the guy who makes balls jokes all day. So if this is going to work, we got to surround me with people who can make balls jokes. So it's really not a big ask for a comedian to do that. And a lot of comedians are looking for side gigs and such. So it was just an introduction. And we did a lot of, we tried some casting, we tried some just networking through comedy verticals and things like that. And again, we got lucky. It sounds like my earlier story about patents. Like, you just put yourself in the right place at the right time and be open to different people.
How do you structure that compensation package? Is he a full-time employee, or is it just you do these 2-day shoots and he gets paid for that time and then you're...
So we generally just bought his time, and it's pretty fascinating. As a side benefit to him is he became minorly internet famous because of this. And he has since built a bit of an identity as, quote, that balls guy.
Yeah.
And
well, I think the Dr. Squatch is the exact same thing, where that blonde-haired guy was a comedian. And
yep. And now he's getting gigs and things. And like, it's funny. And he has all this like extra material because of all these crazy experiences that he had because of us. And he's super smart, and it's helped him build his brand and whatnot. They tried some other concepts as far as currently they have a woman that they've hired who's interviewing people. There's a whole suite of different people who are out there. And there's always the concept that you might be able to create sort of a short form shtick. Like, it becomes a thing to go out and interview people about their balls, and whether or not we can franchise that idea across a lot of different influencers. As the CEO, I have some concerns about letting that get a little bit too wild. I could think of a lot of ways that could go sideways.
yeah.
But it's certainly possible and something that could happen long term. But the format was they'd film for a few days in these cool sites, and they developed a really good eye for the type of person who would be good to interact with, just get a good vibe. And they'd usually have like the sound person or another person who was in the mix who would do sort of pre-interviews and get a sense for who was going to be a character. And then they'd pull the best out of those people. But it's a numbers game. So you'd interview 75 people in a day. And honestly, we get a lot of content from that. So dozens of 15, 30-second pieces.
Yeah. So like single interviews will be what gets uploaded?
Yes.
Okay. And then if you don't mind me asking, what would be the range you would pay a comedian for 2 days of work? Is that like $1,000 a day, or?
It depended on the comedian, the location, and just sort of their availability and such. It depended. We tend to negotiate in and out.
It'd be lower than that?
No, I mean, it depended. Honestly, it depended. And part of it was making longer-term commitments. I love making longer-term commitments to people. Like, hey, like, do a good job, and let's basically retain you and give you a source of income where this makes sense, and it's fun, and it gives you material, and this is all goodness.
And then how many shoots would you be doing a month? So is this like a monthly thing that you're doing, or?
It could have been. We didn't necessarily have the budget to do it as frequently as we'd like. Yeah. So we tended to do a little bit more than one a quarter, I would say. So every few months.
But that would give you enough content for the whole quarter.
And then a lot of the focus, the thesis of the opportunity was to drive the brand into the U.S., right? So we did a whole U.S. tour where he was in New York and Boston, and he came to Utah, and which is particularly funny to do what he was doing in Utah. But yeah, so that was a bigger engagement. That was a multi-week engagement, and he's a real adult comedian, so he had day rates and things like that.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of like this process, like how to scale it up, how to, like you talked about the investment, and it seems like a lot of investment. Would you do everything by the books, or would you like get a license to interview people in California or whatever, like all these places that they have weird laws and registrations and stuff, or you just kind of fly under the radar?
It depended on the location.
Yeah.
Nobody ever got arrested. I can say that. They did get chased away by cops in Paris once, though.
Oh, did they really?
Did indeed. They were.
Did you get that on film?
They were afraid to film. The police laughed, but they weren't really laughing. They chased our film crew away from the Eiffel Tower, which there was a French-speaking comedian who was there. As far as usage, we were very careful about usage and making sure that we had the rights to actually use people's images. And
so like everyone's signing paperwork.
Yeah, they're signing paperwork. They're signing some paperwork, and we would give them a trimmer or something like that and thank them. And occasionally somebody would change their mind. Like a piece would go viral, and it gets millions of views. And what seemed like a good idea when you were out with your buddies, all of a sudden didn't feel like a good idea when your boss shows it to you on Monday.
Yeah.
So we were very good about like,
It's just taking it. Yeah, we had the same problem at Beard Brand. Like someone comes in and gets a haircut. How can this be like, why would you want to take it down? But someone will say, oh, he's got a zit on his face or something like that. And, like it is hard to like kind of, as a content creator, I forget how much I'm used to like the criticism, but how hard it can be for someone who's not used to the limelight. So we've had some like great pieces of content that we had to take down.
And I don't sweat it too much. We produced a lot of content. It was a little frustrating when we had a really good piece, one or two that we had to take down for various reasons, but it happens.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the advantage with shorts is essentially like your shelf life is probably over anyways. Like you're not going to see that come back. Whereas on YouTube, there's a little bit long tail to the amount of people who are viewing it. Did you do long form as well, or was it all short form?
We did do long form, but not through this particular method. We worked with an awesome production company in the UK where we did numerous long form 3-minute concepts. One of the fun things that I discovered with this brand is that lots of people wanted to work with it. It was, if you have a creative team who's spending all day doing baby powders and soaps and things like that, and you come to them with a no holds barred like brand like this, they would basically reward their employees by being put on this account. So we would get just awesome people who were like wildly creative and good rates, much better rates than I've seen in my other brands, just because they wanted to do it. It was fun. It was fun. It was silly. It was refreshing. And they knew that they were going to be able to push it to the edge. And I love some of that long form content. It's on the Balls YouTube site. There are a couple of pieces in there that are absolutely hilarious. And the long form just didn't work particularly well commercially. It would get some views, but it never really got virality, even though it was wickedly funny. And I tend to look at content as not a commodity, but this resource that needs to be harvested. So whether it was short form or long form, we'd always make sure that we used every iota of the content. And so we could use it in ads, we could use it on landers, we could use it all over the place, and try not to waste any of it.
You've moved on from Balls, and I kind of want to talk about, the what's next, because I think you're in a very interesting spot at this point. I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they exit their business, they sell their business, life happens or whatever. They need a break. They burn out, or the business is on autopilot and they're looking for something to do. Walk me through your thought process for how you're in this transitionary period and, what's kind of pulling your heartstrings.
Sure. I think we're in a very interesting place as marketers right now. And I found myself at a point in my career that I've been around a long time now. Now I'm the oldest guy in the room. It's sort of shocking how that happens. And the sort of brands that I'm talking with are pretty large. They're in the 50 million, 100 million, 100 million plus range. And they all have sort of similar challenges where here we are post-COVID. And several of these brands grew very rapidly during COVID. They went from 20 to 80 plus $1 million, pretty much on acquisition marketing. And here we are post-COVID, and there's a rationalization that's heading their way where the business isn't sustainable as a $75 million business based on consumer patterns that they saw during COVID, but it's probably not going to sink all the way down to a $20 million business either. The reality is somewhere in between, and they're incredibly frustrated and scared because they've probably added to their overhead, they've added to the complexity of their business, and now they really in their soul feel that they're a $100 million business, but they're really not. So working through what that means from the business from an operational perspective and a marketing optimization perspective, and exposing them to this just glorious asset that brands of that size have, which is their existing customer base, is really pretty exciting. That some of these brands will have millions of customers, and they've never really bothered figuring out how to analyze those customers for what else can they do with those customers? How else can we engage those customers and really form a lasting brand from those engagements, as opposed to just beating our head up against the wall? And beating your head up against the wall is also compounded by what we're seeing as far as customer acquisition costs right now. Not all brands are experiencing this, but I would say the majority of e-commerce brands are seeing a lot of stress in top of funnel acquisition coming from changes in privacy, changes in the way the platforms work, market saturation. There's just a ton of competition out there. It's just way harder to acquire customers. And it's not good enough anymore to have merely a good product and merely a good brand. You also have to have a customer experience that goes deeper than that. You really have to develop that customer relationship on a long-term basis. You need to surprise and delight them. And that surprising and delighting them starts right in the funnel. So you don't just advertise a generic brand and push them to a landing page or a homepage and hope it helps or hope it converts. You have to drive them into subject matter landing pages that make sense versus the demographic of the ads that you had placed in social media, so the whole experience makes sense. And then you have to know what they bought. And most digital marketers and e-commerce people consider a CRM to be Klaviyo plus Shopify, and we do some segments and things like that. But if you're talking about a bigger brand with millions of data points, it gets much more complex, and the marketing puzzles get deeper and deeper and deeper. So I see that as just a really exciting challenge, and I hope to be able to help some brands work their way through that with sort of these ground level marketing lessons. Like if you go to a CPG conference and there are a lot of marketing folks that wear suits and such, they're going to have a very, very different perspective on what works in terms of customer retention and customer acquisition than people in the e-commerce community. And as somebody who has certainly worn a lot of suits in my life, I can really bridge the gap between those, and I can speak both languages, I think.
Yeah. So why are you more drawn to this kind of consulting and coaching versus buying another business or buying a patent or licensing? And is the grind?
I'm torn. I honestly am deeply, deeply torn. I think starting again from zero might be too much unless I had just an awesome partner, like basically a business marriage going on where we could feed off of each other's energy. But doing it as a solopreneur in those first couple of years of grinding through it don't sound super appealing to me. On the other side, the debt markets right now, the cost of debt are such that acquisition looks a little bit less appealing, the buy then build type model. There's certainly opportunities out there. I think there are also a lot of landmines out there in the market. That's always been the case, but I think there are a lot of these brands that are in crisis mode because they no longer know how to acquire customers. And it would just be pure hubris for me to walk into their world and think that, I'm just going to fix all of this. Yeah. So, I've taken some time for reflection here and personal health, and I live in Park City and I had the opportunity to ski a bunch this season. So this is all great stuff, but entrepreneurs can't sit still for very long. So I will certainly figure it out. And I'm looking at all kinds of different options that are out there.
So if you got a $50 million brand and you're listening to this and you want to hire Kevin, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm easy to find. I'm sure you'll put my email in the show notes, but it's Kevin at KDF Aegis, AEGIS.com. And that is the unfortunately difficult name to spell of my consultancy. Yeah. As a marketer, I should know better, but no, I don't.
I'm sure there's a lot of Kevin Williams too.
A lot of Kevin Williams. There are a few of those. There are a few Kevin Williams out there, but I am pretty easy to find that way. Yeah, and I basically, I'm positioning myself as a fractional chief revenue officer or chief marketing officer, even coach for CEOs who are trying to solve some of these problems. And I have the advantage of having built these brands, and I've done pretty much everything there is to do in a company, so I can be pretty useful that way.
Sweet. Well, I hope our listeners enjoy this episode as much as I did. Kevin's a brilliant mind. I encourage you to reach out and connect with him. Well, he's been very generous with this time for me. I don't know if everyone else gets that same privilege, but thank you so much for coming on. This has been another e-commerce Conversations. Cheers, and keep on growing.